We, of course, have been bringing you live visuals of the commemoration ceremonies happening across the United States. Today, of course, marks 20 years since the 9/11 attacks took place. Let's now cut across to Pennsylvania.
Of your brethren, gravely injured, or that have lost their lives while serving, or as a result of their service during these past 20 years. Their loss reminds us that September 11th was not a singular event, but a date that marked a cultural paradigm shift in our country and for freedom-loving people across the globe. To the families of Flight 93 here and at home, honoring a loved one, my heart goes out to you. Having lost a brother on September 11th, I too live with a grief that is deep, consuming, and always present. For those that lost loved ones in the terrorist attacks on our country 20 years ago today, you know that we can never move on, but that we must continue to move forward. On September 11th, 2001, we lost a total of 2,977 innocent souls. And that morning, more than 6,000 people were injured in the attack on our country. 2,606 died in the World Trade Center, 125 at the Pentagon, and 246 innocent people were murdered on the 4 hijacked planes, 40 of which were on Flight 93, brought down here in a field just outside of Shanksville, Pennsylvania, as our heroes fought to overcome the evil brought to our shores that morning. To date, an additional 2,000 first responders that took part in the immediate rescue and continued recovery efforts have died from related illnesses. And with every month, we continue to lose more. The ripple effect of September 11th is unfathomable. There are still many questions to be answered about the day, facts to be declassified and released, and justice to be served. So much of September 11th involved pain, loss, and terror. Our lives were never to be the same. And yet, from the ashes of the day, stories of heroism and extraordinary courage emerged, providing hope to a world adrift in fear and confusion. First responders running into burning buildings with little regard for their own safety, while citizens inside those buildings refused to run from danger so that they could offer assistance and comfort to those less able, surely knowing that their decision would cost them all but their honor. And here in the skies over southwestern Pennsylvania.
Now, for more about the mood in the country today, our correspondent Susan Tehrani joins us live from New York for more. Susan, you, of course, are in New York, and we've just shown our viewers different visuals coming in from the commemoration ceremonies with current and former president, of course. Tell us a bit about the mood in the country today. How do you think 9/11 has changed America as well as the world at large?
You know, there are a few moments that are always etched in history, and everyone agrees that 9/11, September 11, 2001, was one of those. But 20 years on, 2011, 2021 will be remembered as one of those as well. Perhaps for the one reason that it's incomprehensible to really understand that the war on terror began 20 years ago, and here we are, really 2 decades on, and there is a so-called government of a Taliban being formed in Afghanistan, the same really group that the United States went to war with because of the attacks against the United States. That's on the one hand really a grim reality to take into consideration. But on the other hand, really, for a lot of Americans, today is not about politics. Today is about remembrance. It's about honoring those who gave their lives and the innocent lives that were lost because of those unjust terrorist attacks. So the never forget has meanings on several folds for Americans.
Right, now Susan,
Here in New York, as you can see, many have gathered outside.
Right, please continue. Yeah.
No, I was just saying, I'm going to step aside and you can see, this is outside of the 9/11 memorial, and we were just telling you earlier that it's a subdued event inside the memorial this year because of COVID restrictions, and it's only the family members of the victims who are attending the actual ceremony. But just looking outside here, you can see how people have gathered to pay their respect and really come as close as they can to the memorial. We're about 3 minutes away to gather, and despite not being able to go inside, really try to pay their respect, pay their dues, be part of this ceremony because of the significance of this milestone being 20 years. U.S. troop withdrawal, 2 decades for a lot of people is a milestone for the people that were alive during that time, but for a lot of people who weren't and were born after that time, it's a world that they only know. A world after the war of terror, a world after 9/11. And we are not at where we were September 12, 2001, but in many ways, a lot of the policies that were shaped during that time continues to resonate for Americans and New Yorkers as well. A lot of the counterterrorism policies that were put in place in 2001 continue to be put in place here in New York. So it resonates in a lot of ways, from counterterrorism policies, from an emotional standpoint for a lot of people. I don't think you can really talk to a single person and they don't remember where they were if they were alive during that time. And from a perspective of, again, that grim reality of what has happened in the last few weeks, this withdrawal, the political aspect of it, and the lessons learned, and where we go from here. And then, pan it all out. We're in a year of a pandemic. New York just came out from being an epicenter of one of the worst pandemics that history has ever seen. So a lot to deal with, but despite this fact, I think it was important enough for many of them to come out and gather and pay their respects, and just to, get a mood and feel of what's going on. But like I said, this is not about politics here today, at least not for now, not for this moment, not among these people that I talk to here right now.
Now, Susan, you just mentioned the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, and that brings me to my next question. Today, as we mark 20 years of 9/11, is there a certain reflection on what has been lost in these 20 years?
Absolutely, and that's what has been really the center stone and the cornerstone of what we've been discussing, and a reflection of not only in Washington, but among veterans, among families who've lost loved ones, among Americans of a new generation moving forward, and among those who will probably ultimately decide whether or not they want to serve this country in the military and the future of America's armed services. And Afghanistan really, for a lot of those who served, when you talk to them, is a failed mission. But for a lot of others, when you talk to them, they say that had it not been to go into Afghanistan, and that wasn't really the question whether to go in or not, that America wouldn't be as secure as it was in the last 20 years. So those are the realities that the United States is grappling with. But I think, as we've mentioned time and again, it wasn't about whether to go to war after September 11th. There was a consensus among the American public. There was a unity among politicians and the public, the executive branch and the public, that you rarely see in America after September 11th, to really go after the quote-unquote bad guys, the terrorists. It was the manner of withdrawal that cannot be lost in definition at this point, despite the fact that this administration wants to forget that, wants the American people to forget and move on. The manner that it withdrew from Afghanistan, the way it decided to depart, but that is the part that hurts for most Americans the most, and that's the part that ultimately in policy making will decide which way America will go, not only here at home, but whether or not in its counterterrorism policies, its relationship with its allies and adversaries, and whether or not it decides to continue to hold the Taliban and its adversaries to the same enemy standard that it did in the past, and to remember that it was ultimately the Taliban who aided and abetted these terrorists who attacked the United States.
Right, Susan, of course, now we're also expecting former U.S. President George Bush to give a speech. What can be expected there?
You know, during the time when George Bush was president, he was one of the most controversial figures of the United States. However, a lot of people 20 years on will argue that the Bush Doctrine saved America from another terrorist attack. So we'll have to wait and see. In the absence of current U.S. President Barack Obama, Joe Biden delivering a live speech on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, on a day that he wished and hoped would have been his mission accomplished moment. And it didn't turn out that way. And a lot of people believe that's the reason he didn't come out and give a live speech. Never mind the televised, pre-recorded 9/11 speech he gave, which really didn't receive that much of a coverage. But George Bush's speech will be noteworthy. Will it be a counter, a reboot to what Joe Biden didn't say? We'll have to wait and see.
Right, absolutely, Susan. And of course, WION will be continuing to track all the updates, and we will watch out for George W. Bush's speech coming up soon. Susan Tehrani, thank you so much for joining us on WION from New York. And now let's cut across to another guest joining us on this live broadcast. Peter Quinn, a former U.S. Army major, joins us live on WION World is One. Major Quinn, thank you so much for joining us at this hour. Now, my first question to you. The way the Taliban ran over Afghanistan, the U.S. withdrew, and the ISIS attack that we have witnessed recently, killing scores of Afghans, including U.S. Marines. Is it not a case of terrorists having won the war after 20 years, especially as we mark the 20 years of the 9/11 attacks?
No, the scheduled withdrawal retrograde from Afghanistan by the United States was a scheduled withdrawal. I'm just a private American citizen. I don't represent the United States government, in my opinion. But when I say, Afghanistan has always been.
Thank you very much. Laura and I are honored to be with you. Madam Vice President, Vice President Cheney, Governor Wolf, Secretary Holland, and distinguished guests. 20 years ago, we all found in different ways, in different places, but all at the same moment, that our lives would be changed forever. The world was loud with carnage and sirens, and then quiet with missing voices that would never be heard again. These lives remain precious to our country and infinitely precious to many of you. Today we remember your loss, we share your sorrow, and we honor the men and women you have loved so long and so well. For those too young to recall that clear September day, it is hard to describe the mix of feelings we experienced. There was horror at the scale of destruction, and awe at the bravery and kindness that rose to meet it. There was shock at the audacity of evil and gratitude for the heroism and decency that opposed it. In the sacrifice of the first responders, in the mutual aid of strangers, in the solidarity of grief and grace, the actions of an enemy revealed the spirit of a people, and we were proud of our wounded nation. In these memories, the passengers and crew of Flight 93 must always have an honored place. Here, the intended targets became the instruments of rescue, and many who are now alive owe a vast, unconscious debt to the defiance displayed in the skies above this field. It would be a mistake to idealize the experience of those terrible events. All that many people could initially see was the brute randomness of death. All that many could feel was unearned suffering. All that many could hear was God's terrible silence. There are many who still struggle with a lonely pain that cuts deep within. In those fateful hours, we learned other lessons as well. We saw that Americans were vulnerable, but not fragile. That they possess a core of strength that's emerging with sudden splendor in the face of death. We vividly felt how every hour with our loved ones was a temporary and holy gift. And we found that even the longest days end. Many of us have tried to make spiritual sense of these events. There is no simple explanation for the mix of providence and human will that sets the direction of our lives. But comfort can come from a different sort of knowledge. After wandering long and lost in the dark, many have found they were actually walking step by step toward grace. As a nation, our adjustments have been profound. Many Americans struggled to understand why an enemy would hate us with such zeal. The security measures incorporated into our lives are both sources of comfort and reminders of our vulnerability. And we have seen growing evidence that the dangers to our country can come not only across borders, but from violence that gathers within. There is little cultural overlap between violent extremists abroad and violent extremists at home. But in their disdain for pluralism, in their disregard for human life, in their determination to defile national symbols, they are children of the same foul spirit, and it is our continuing duty to confront them. After 9/11, millions of brave Americans stepped forward and volunteered to serve in the armed forces. The military measures taken over the last 20 years to pursue dangers at their source have led to debate. But one thing is certain. We owe an assurance to all who have fought our nation's most recent battles. Let me speak directly to veterans and people in uniform. The cause you pursued at the call of duty is the noblest America has to offer. You have shielded your fellow citizens from danger. You have defended the beliefs of your country and advanced the rights of the downtrodden. You have been the face of hope and mercy in dark places. You have been a force for good in the world. Nothing that has followed, nothing, can tarnish your honor or diminish your accomplishments. To you and to the honored dead, our country is forever grateful. In the weeks and months following the 9/11 attacks, I was proud to lead an amazing, resilient, united people. When it comes to the unity of America, those days seem distant from our own. Malign force seems at work in our common life that turns every disagreement into an argument and every argument into a clash of cultures. So much of our politics has become a naked appeal to anger, fear, and resentment. That leaves us worried about our nation and our future together. I come without explanations or solutions. I can only tell you what I've seen. On America's day of trial and grief, I saw millions of people instinctively grab for a neighbor's hand and rally to the cause of one another. That is the America I know. At a time when religious bigotry might have flowed freely, I saw Americans reject prejudice and embrace people of Muslim faith. That is the nation I know. At a time when nativism could have stirred hatred and violence against people perceived as outsiders, I saw Americans reaffirm their welcome to immigrants and refugees. That is the nation I know. At a time when some viewed the rising generation as individualistic and decadent, I saw young people embrace an ethic of service and rise to selfless action. That is the nation I know. This is not mere nostalgia. It is the truest version of ourselves. It is what we have been and what we can be again. 20 years ago, terrorists chose a random group of Americans on a routine flight to be collateral damage in a spectacular act of terror. The 33 passengers and 7 crew of Flight 93 could have been any group of citizens selected by fate. In a sense, they stood in for us all. The terrorists soon discovered that a random group of Americans is an exceptional group of people facing an impossible circumstance. They comforted their loved ones by phone, braced each other for action, and defeated the designs of evil. These Americans were brave, strong, and united in ways that shocked the terrorists, but should not surprise any of us. This is the nation we know. And whenever we need hope and inspiration, we can look to the skies and remember. God bless.
That, of course, was former U.S. President George W. Bush addressing the nation on the fateful day of September 11th in 2021, 20 years after the September 11 attacks took place that changed America and the world forever. The former American president, of course, rallied up American patriotism through his words. He said some poignant words right there. Bush mentioned that he vividly remembers how a lovely hour with loved ones was a temporary gift. He says that there were security measures incorporated in our lives which are reminders of our vulnerabilities, referring to potential security threats, of course, that face all of us. He said that we have seen that violence can not just come from beyond borders, but also within. After 9/11, millions of brave Americans volunteered and served in armed forces. That's what the former U.S. president said. He also had a message for the men in uniform, and he said that you have been the face of hope, and nothing can reduce your accomplishments. To you and to the honored dead, the country is forever indebted. That is what the former U.S. president had to say. Now, for a deeper analysis into what the former U.S. president said on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, joining us now is another guest, Major Peter Quinn. Major Quinn, thanks so much for joining us. Now, we just heard the former U.S. president give a rather moving speech where he rallied up American patriotism, referring to, of course, the services of the armed forces. What do you make of the speech so far?
Thank you for having me. I appreciate this. A very moving speech at a very moving time, the 20th anniversary of 9/11. This is something that's very near and dear to my own heart. I lost my best friend, Andrew Basevich Jr. He was killed in action in Iraq in 2007 on Mother's Day. And so I've lost, like many other soldiers, met many close friends, brothers in arms, sisters in arms over the years. And so to hear a former U.S. president make a speech such as George Bush's is moving to me, and I appreciate his sentiments.
Right. Now, Major, we also just heard George W. Bush talk about his actions in Afghanistan. Now, Bush was one president who controlled a lot of actions and developments that followed in the years to come. And today we, of course, have an American president that still took momentous decisions that will decide the fate of Afghans to come. The Taliban yet again are back in power. What do you make of the recent developments in Afghanistan?
Yeah, to focus on the Taliban is to focus on the tactical situation. The reality is we should be looking at the strategic play at hand. If we look at Afghanistan's timeline well beyond the United States' involvement in Central Asia, one can see that Afghanistan, people call it that hackneyed graveyard of empires. But the reality is this is a great game. This is great power competition. And the Taliban are but one personality that's at play in this great game. So we need to remember to keep our eye as international actors, as good stewards of international relations on what's going on the greater stage.
Right. Now, with the Taliban back in power in Afghanistan and also threats of more terror coming in from Afghan soil, should the U.S. be prepared for more security threats in the future?
I'm a private American citizen, so I don't have analysis that speaks on behalf of the U.S. government. But I would suggest to you that, even my enemy, I was an American warrior. I was a veteran, and there's a universal code of warriors throughout the land, and that's at the end of the day, that's the right to be free, that universal right of man. I would imagine that when one takes a deeper look beneath the surface of the Taliban, clearly, the United States entered into the Doha Peace Accords, so there was some sense of rational play that wasn't just a charade. So there are those that are rational actors, and then of the sub-12 factions, there are those that may be idiotic and those that may be far, far extremist as well. So the question is not whether the Taliban are myopically terroristic or non-terroristic. That's something for U.S. foreign policy, U.S. Treasury, and U.S. State Department to determine. But the question is, what will they do moving forward? And how will they do so collectively as a group or as a splinter group? And so we're going to see the potential for devolution into civil war over the next 3 months. I think that's something that should not just concern the Afghan right of man, but it should concern every citizen across the world. Central Asia, especially Afghanistan, will become the fulcrum, the pivot point in what Samuel Huntington calls the clash of civilizations. And so we need to remain steadfast to remember our statecraft and foreign policy and how we can avoid that.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us on WION at this hour, and thank you for all your inputs. WION World is One is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news updates on the move.